I'm Ronald Poole, the current president of the Barbados Society of Psychology. The topic of narcissism and parental alienation is one that's dear to me. In this profession, I get to meet a lot of individuals who were once in relationships with narcissists. One of the most concerning aspects of being in a relationship with a narcissist are the long-term effects it has on the victim. These individuals can sometimes have serious trust issues, poor self-efficacy, constant and unnecessary overthinking, just to name a few. These issues can sometimes affect a victim for a very long time, causing long-term mental health challenges. Therefore, education on this topic is a must. As it relates to parental alienation, this is an ever-growing issue in our society. It is also at this stage the narcissist blames the other partner for the family breakup, thereby causing confusion and self-doubt, this time within the mind of the child. Therefore, as a society, it is essential we become educated on these topics.
My name is Cornelius Bartlett and I'm the founder and chairman of Family Fest Barbados. I'm also a family advocate. I want to make an appeal to all persons who are in social interest groups for families, whether you are a social worker, a psychologist, a therapist, a guidance counselor, you're a member of the Barbados Police Service, you're a member of the Barbados Judiciary, or any person who is involved in family interest. I would encourage you and implore you to tune in during the month of July 2024 to hear more about narcissism and parental alienation. Of course, as we unpack it, we cannot, and it is not possible in 12 discussions to give you all that you need to know. But I'm hopeful that this would pique your interest to go and investigate more so that you get yourself better knowledgeable and well equipped to deal with these family issues as they arise. So just tune in on Facebook or YouTube. Family Fest Barbados is the handle, and hear more about this very riveting and devastating topic of narcissism and parental alienation. See you online, and God bless.
We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness. With God on our side, we're marching strong, looking out for hurting children all around. We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, happiness.
Good afternoon to you. It is a beautiful Sunday, and it is the 28th day of July 2024. And we're getting ready to round off a wonderful month of discussions on a pivotal topic that affects many people who don't even know they're affected by it. We're talking about narcissism and parental alienation. And it has been a very interesting and very knowledgeable set of discussions. There's been a lot of knowledge that has been handed out. And we really want to wrap that up today with giving the public, you, a chance to interact with our panel of experts, to be able to pose your questions, your situations to them, and to get the best chance you can get at navigating this potential minefield of narcissism and parental alienation. But we recognize that there are lots of people who are joining us today who may be joining us for the first time. You may have missed Men's Week and Women's Week, Children's Week, and even Family Week as we wrap everything up together and tie everything together. So at this time, I'd like you to pay close attention. I'm going to invite Mr. Cornelius Bartlett, who is the founder of Family Fest, to just give us a quick highlight of exactly what we mean when we talk about narcissism and parental alienation and what we're asking you to look out for in your family.
Thank you, Graham, and good evening to our listeners and viewers. Just to give a snapshot in about maybe 2 minutes. You might wonder, or some persons may think that they know what narcissism is, but many people, even today, I asked a pastor from Guyana that I met if he knew what parental alienation was. He said no. And then when I told him what it was, he said, oh yes, I've known about that for years. Now, the reason we clump the two together in a discussion is because the research shows that parental alienation, when researched to its root, at the end of the parental alienation, you usually find a narcissist or narcissistic personality disorder. So let's look at what narcissism is. Narcissism is really a personality disorder. It's considered a mental health issue where an individual finds it difficult, for whatever reason, many reasons, but they find it difficult to show empathy even for their own children. And by being a narcissist or being narcissistic, that individual, once triggered, becomes extremely volatile. They're manipulative, they lie. And you could imagine that within the context and confines of a family, especially after you break up, you can imagine that you would have a lot of turmoil being leveled on those persons who are the targets of the lies and the onslaught. Now, in terms of parental alienation, when the narcissistic personality starts to project parental alienation, understand clearly that parental alienation has to do with a set of behaviors. And within parental alienation, you have what is called the alienation tactics or the alienation ploy, where the individual sets about, usually after a divorce, but sometimes and very often it starts while both parties are living in the same house, where you have the campaign of denigration by one parent towards another for whatever reason. That person may no longer be getting the supply as a narcissist from their spouse. But whatever the reason, one spouse sets about on a campaign of denigration, of playing victim, of whatever it takes that results in that child or children taking on the role of that parent and deciding that they will hate the parent or disrespect the parent just as much as the parent who is actually perpetrating it. So in the context of parental alienation, you have the alienator, you have the object, which is the child or children, and then you have the target, which is the alienated. Now, what the alienator succeeds in doing, because I say succeed because the alienator does not always succeed. You may have a household or a family with three children, and the alienation strategy only works on one. In the event where it works, it is referred to as parental alienation syndrome. So in other words, parental alienation refers to the set of behaviors, but the parental alienation syndrome, which usually happens to some children, is the result of the alienation strategies working or succeeding in infiltrating one or several children. Now, I mentioned source, which is the alienator. I mentioned object, which is the alienating child or the child that is used. And then you have the target. And let me just say that the source doesn't always have to be a parent. The source can be another family member. Let's say a parent dies and other family members inherit the child or children. Parental alienation can be perpetrated by those family members. It can also be an organization, a church, or any kind of organization that exerts influence over that child. Now, what happens in the particular case is that you have the alienating parent convincing the child that the other parent is unsafe, unloving, and unavailable. And once that sets in, and the child believes it, then you see a set of alienating behaviors as a result of the syndrome coming from that child to that parent. And you could imagine that as a parent who would have once had a loving relationship with your child, then a divorce or breakup happens within as little as months. Your child with which you used to have a great relationship, used to go to dinners with, go to the beach and play, go to sporting events and whatever, that child no longer wants to have anything to do with you because the strategies executed by the parent that has the child in main custody, all of a sudden, that particular child no longer wants to have anything to do with you. In fact, that child also can be involved in telling others a lot of negative things about you as a parent with which they previously had a great relationship. And I would close on this. Now, when we talk about parental alienation, it's not only the heartbreak that the parent suffers, but we're talking about the risk to society when that child goes on to develop a variety of problems. That child can go on to develop anxiety issues, issues of depression, drug use, suicidal ideations, cutting of self, and difficulty in forming relationships, and detachment in relationships, and the list goes on. So you could understand that, or you would want to understand that a lot of what we're seeing in society as problems, not always, but very often, could be the results of this issue of parental alienation and the syndrome associated with it. So I would just close on that and say that as a society, we really need to do better by our children and for our children. And if we want to make a better tomorrow, we have to make sure and do it right today. So let us look today at getting as much as we can out of this session where we have all the experts in panel here. And I trust that the public will get more than their heart's content in terms of answers to the questions that they may have. Back over to you, Graham.
Thank you so very much, Cornelius. And welcome again, as I said before. And this evening, I don't think that I would be doing us justice if I didn't allow our panel of experts. You've heard from Cornelius, the brainchild behind Family Fest, and the person who was inspired to focus in this direction this year. But we have several other panelists, several other experts, and I want you to hear from each of them about their personal connection with this issue. So I'm going to ask each of you to come through, and I'm going to go in the orderly and mannerly, time-honored fashion of ladies first. To introduce yourself, and please give us a short 2-minute excerpt of your contact with narcissism and parental alienation, and how it's affected you to the point where you've decided this is something that you need to be involved in. Go ahead, ladies.
Well, let me go first. My name is Alison Gotit. Thank you, Graham. Great introduction, Cornelius. I am the Director of Clinical Services at Verdant and Marina House, which is the lone drug rehab treatment facility here in Barbados. The reason I'm so connected to parental alienation and narcissism is because we have done our own research, and as Cornelius mentioned, about persons who have been impacted, the child who has been impacted due to some of these adverse childhood experiences. Some of them would use their coping skills in terms of using drugs or other unhealthy behaviors. And when we've done our research and we've looked at the family of origin, we have found a high percentage of persons who would have experienced this dysfunctionality within their parents, within their family, in terms of one member, putting them against another and then being in between. Sometimes believe in the narrative that one of the parents is telling them, and create a lot of negative images and thoughts. Unfortunately, it has been seen in my experience, normally happens with a lot of the young men, the boys, and then as they go on, they have these negative thoughts of maybe their dad or what they thought their mum was doing, etc. So it's really important that we intervene before the person starts, the child who becomes an adult, because we've got to remember, children don't stay children forever. They become adults and they have these unhealthy coping behaviors because they feel neglected, they feel abandoned, they feel confused, etc. So it's really key that I'm on the panel to discuss us intervening and ensuring that we are aware as individuals and as a community.
Good evening, everyone. I'll go next. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Cornelius, for having me here. As Allison said, I'm also a member of the Verdant and Marina House, where I am the child and mental health specialist, as well as the creative arts psychotherapist. Particularly why I say yes to this panel discussion, because as a psychotherapist, I target a lot of the subconscious and the root causes of any person that comes into my space, but in particular, working with the child or the children of the family. That in itself it says a lot and enough for parents to know that children are highly impacted when there is parental alienation, as well as the narcissism being shown in the household. Parents tend to neglect, negate, put down, push aside the children when they're experiencing that alienation between each other, and not being mindful and aware of how it is impacting the child in their bodies, impacting the child even in their mental health and emotional regulation. And then guidance counselors like Shernal and others and other counselors in the school get that impact as well. So targeting the child or children that are experiencing parental alienation is an area or a group that we need to focus on every day, not just for specialized or when it's happening in the household, but we need to always not forget the child or the children, because they also are the ones impacted. And they're the ones that are also not functioning well as we would want as parents of those children. So I'm very excited to be here today to talk about the different nonverbal interventions that can be used in the families as we work on parental alienation, as well as the narcissistic personality being exhibited in the households. So thank you for having me.
Hello, good afternoon. I am Shernal Clark. I am the guidance counselor at the Darrell Jordan Secondary School. And the experiences that I usually have, or I would have, it's usually heartbreaking because the child is caught in the middle sometimes, and the child feels trapped, the child feels depressed, the child feels like there is no way out. They may or may not take sides. And if they're forced to take sides, it usually is not a very pleasant feeling. And when they come to us as guidance counselors and they feel helpless, sometimes we also feel a little helpless, because our duty first and foremost is to help the students, the children, to get through difficult times in their lives. But when it also involves the parents, then that's another level of involvement. And at times you will get resistance and from parents, whether it be resistance outright, as in they don't want to come in to have a meeting, or it be denial. They usually probably will tell you a whole different story from what the child is saying. And most times you get the impression that something is being covered up. Sometimes you will get the harsh reality of the situation. They'll tell you the harsh reality of the situation, but most times it is that the children are caught in the middle and they feel helpless, they feel hopeless. And sometimes a phrase that I would use would be, it will not always be like this. And sometimes that's the best thing you can say at the time to comfort a child who feels like the world is ending. So parental alienation, I don't think that adults realize the real serious impact that it has on children. A lot of adults don't think that children think, or that children see, and children acknowledge, and children understand what is happening. So they generally can only see through their own eyes as adults, rather than seeing how the situation is affecting the children and the children's future in some cases. So I think that it is something that needs to be addressed, probably in more fora, so that persons are aware of the effects that this whole issue of narcissism and parental alienation has on our children. And that's why a lot of them are angry and sometimes can't explain why they're so angry and why they lash out. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chanel, and the others have gone before me. I'm Donna Talcott, and I am a guidance counselor, but I'm also a parenting consultant. And I've worked in other countries besides Barbados. I've worked in the Cayman Islands, and I've also worked in Montreal. What I have noticed is that when working, especially with the younger children, you always have to go to the parent to have the issue really resolved. Working with a child alone is not enough. And through the years, the whole aspect of parent alienation and working with narcissistic parents, it's a very tricky one, because most of the time people don't come through as though they are, they're very manipulative, the narcissists, and they're also very smart. So what tends to happen is they would tend to come through first and basically acknowledge, quote unquote, that their child has a problem. So many times they would even throw off those people who are trying to help by putting all the focus on the child. When you do start to work with a child, you realize that the child is exhibiting symptoms of something much bigger than something that's just childish. Many cases I've worked with parents who would put their children in counseling and say that the child is having panic attacks and is anxious and is depressed, and would then associate it with the targeted parent. And in many cases, until the diagnosis of what's really going on is made, and it's not from the narcissistic parent, because the narcissist does not believe that they have a problem, and that is a part of the illness. But it is a recognized issue from the DSM. And the interesting thing is working with trying to have a therapeutic approach. You cannot work with a narcissistic parent. You have to end up working with a target. And that's one of the few therapies, approaches where you don't work with the person that has the actual problem. You work with the person who is the one who ends up having to deal with the problem. And as a parenting consultant, what I have also noticed is that the children, as Cornelius did say, they have a lot of these issues while they're children, but the main problem is when they become adults, when they're able to say what they want to do, who they want to do it with. And in most cases, children of who have gone through the parent alienation syndrome tend to move away from both parents. They tend to have a difficult time, as was said earlier, creating their own safe zone for a family life. And later on, when their parents are older, it comes out. Still, with the abandonment of their older parents, the one that they had been alienated from, they may try to reconnect in some way, but they have lost that initial um, bonding with them. And then when they understand what the alienator or alienating parent has done, they would tend to eventually cut them off. And you end up with someone who basically has, later on in life, not much of a support system when it comes to family. And where the alienating situation separated siblings as well, then you have further problems of isolation. So isolation tends to follow a lot of the offspring of people, of parents who have been alienating them. And again, I've seen many cases where from preschool, yes, as early as preschool, through tertiary education, children are manipulated, infected, and they end up not knowing themselves, not knowing why they behave the way they do. Why is it that they can't get along with not only their the parents, but authority figures, people that could represent a mother or represent a father? And although also happens when people are going through separation, a lot of the parent alienation that I have had to deal with was when both parents were living under the same roof, or both parents were living in the same district.
So we're not even talking about a separation there. We're not even talking about a separation. That's interesting.
No. It can happen right under the same roof while you're still together. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Donna, and thank you, ladies. Very quickly, let's get a little bass into place. Good evening to Fabian Sargent. We've already heard from Cornelius Bartlett. Good evening, Fabian.
Good evening, good evening. I don't know how much bass I can bring.
Man, that's great, man. We turn
yes,
the subwoofer.
Either bass or tenor, it'll work.
yeah. Thanks for having me, and it is indeed a pleasure, as always, to be part of these conversations. This topic, parental alienation and narcissism, very important. I am the founder and president of Men Empowerment Network Support, and as a men's organization, many of the men that actually come to the organization experience challenges with parental alienation, and we try to provide as much support as we can. We try to provide as much education, and in reforms like this really pushes the advocacy, which is definitely necessary. We need to provide. I mean, I guess a lot of these men, they don't know where to turn, they don't know what to do. Even when they have to face the narcissistic type behaviors. And as we work with boys as well in our Safe Zone program, some of them who may be victims or live in households with parents with narcissistic traits or narcissistic parents, we have to deal with that at the end in terms of also trying to provide that support to these boys while also trying to work with these parents. So it is a big topic, a big discussion. I think we underestimate the effects that it has on our society. But I guess coming out of this forum, well, know that Family Fest has put the microscope on these two areas. Maybe we can have a lot more conversation, a lot more intervention, and maybe people can be a lot more empowered. I guess even as self to really focus on themselves. From the last time, that was one of my things, is that I think we need to do a lot of self-reflection to see if we ourselves are contributing to these issues. So I look forward to the general discussion this evening.
Thank you, Fabian. All right, as we did say, we are interested in your engagement. The public, people who have seen it live and direct in front of them, who have seen it happen across various spheres, whether it's professionally or personally. And if you have come across this and you've got a question, if you want to share your experience or want clarity on your experience, please make sure and message us right there in the comments, YouTube, Facebook. Send in your questions, send in your comments, and let's get to it. But I find it very interesting that one of the things I think that we can definitely say is there is a recognition that there are different elements in this issue called narcissism and parental alienation, which need direct treatment. And it's a sad thing to know that, as was said, sometimes you can't work with the source of the issue. Sometimes all you can kind of do is isolate yourself, not necessarily physically or directly, but emotionally and mentally, so that you are trained to understand that what the alienator is doing is an issue, and that you can be able to maneuver around it and keep your peace, keep your understanding. Now, I understand working with the adult in the room, working with the alienated party, the one who is trying to maintain their relationship with their child. But can that be done directly with the child? That's something that I'm wondering. I know that we have guidance counselors in here. Can it be successful where you're able to engage with the child and help them to understand what's happening as young as, let's say, preteen, 10 and 9, and even before? Is that possible for a child to be able to be assisted in peeling back these curtains of the effects of the alienator on them?
Graham, before I allow one of the guidance counselors to answer, I couldn't help but to jump in here and to say that by virtue and by nature of the title parental alienation, bear in mind that it is when the syndrome sets in, it is that the child no longer wants to have any dealing with the parent. So you have the complication where, so let me take it to the extreme, because I really want this to come forth in a very sharp and very pronounced and candid way. You can have as far as a court order that says you are to have, each parent is to have the child week on or children week on and week off. And you have this demon, as I call it, in the background called parental alienation that has set in, the syndrome. And the child flatly says, I don't want to go with daddy, or I don't want to go with mommy. But daddy is toxic, my mommy is toxic. Of course, that's a lie, because by virtue of parental alienation, the child has been coached through explosive behaviors, through criticisms constantly, through the parent giving threats and whatever. So the child now retreats either voluntarily or involuntarily into rejecting that parent. So I don't know how the others are going to answer that in terms of what can be done when the actual object of who you're doing it for has chosen to reject the other parent. So I'm very anxious to hear how Chanel or one of the others, somebody in here that does the guidance counseling will answer that. Just want to put that in there.
Donna, you wanted to go ahead?
Sure, I'll go. In many cases, the child that's the target of the alienating parent is also being love bombed by the parent. It's difficult to tell a child who is in love with the parent that's given them everything they want and feeding their anxiety by giving them everything they need to overcome, to explain to that child that this is actually a tactic of parental alienation. Okay? The only thing that can be done is once the child starts to exhibit certain signs of anxiety and depression, things like that, within the school setting as a guidance counselor, one, you can refer to a psychologist where it gets out of control, okay, where it is beyond what you can offer at school in terms of assistance. You know, when the systematic relaxation techniques don't work, when the child then comes and tells you things like, you know, I'm self-harming, that's when we will have to refer Now, even when we refer, a lot of the times it is difficult because of the manipulation for some of the mental health practitioners to actually see and understand that it is parental alienation with a narcissism. Because again, the parent who is the alienating parent is more likely going to be the one to bring the child and to explain that the child is acting like this because of the whatever the other parent is doing. Okay, so you have to understand as a professional first. You have to really understand what this is and be able to be astute in looking at the signs and the symptoms. I do believe that there's certain criteria that are in play to say, well, this behavior looks like. And we've got to be aware of that and don't simply get, as we can say a term here, don't get triangulated into siding with the manipulating parent, right? So that's the opening for the guidance counselors in this school. Chanel, you can go ahead and pick up from here if you want.
Yes, please. I would say that sometimes if it doesn't get as far as the child doing self-harming behaviors or suicide ideation, even then sometimes you're able to get through to the child in terms of helping the child to move past what they may be forced into believing. There are certain conversations, certain ways that you can get into, but we don't give advice. We will go on what the child is saying, and we will use that to steer the conversation in a particular direction. So sometimes, and I've had it happen where I was able to get through to child or children that would have been in that kind of situation with parental alienation, and get the child to open up and have the child to see that there's still some kind of connection that the alienated parent is trying to have with them, and the child or the children, they may come around, for want of a better word, come around to be willing to be open to see things from the other side or to try to reach out as well. But it's kind of dangerous in some cases because you have some of the alienating parents that are so dominant and that they're so they stipulate the child is to have no connection whatsoever with the other parent. And that is where it becomes difficult because they wouldn't even allow the child to talk to the other parent. So, but you do have cases where that alienated parent is trying to reach out. The child is apprehensive because they're afraid of what the other parent might say or do to them if they try to have contact or try to have a relationship. But sometimes it can be worked out before it gets too far in some cases, but it really is a ticklish, I would call it a ticklish situation, and you feel quite uncomfortable sometimes, and you can only imagine what the child might be feeling because they have to experience it on a daily basis. They have to live with the parent that is dominant. They have to be mindful of the things they say and do. So in some cases, yes, you will get through and you will have get the child to be open to having connections with the other parent. But in some cases, it's a hard fought battle.
This is really a situation of having to navigate an emotional and mental minefield, really and truly. And if it's difficult for an adult as the alienated parent, you can only imagine what it could be like for a child. Well, good evening to Troy Clark from the Bahamas. He's in the Bahamas and he's tuned in. He said he works with offenders of domestic violence and practitioners who work with victims. And he has a question. What are the early warning signs of narcissism in a family member? And how can they be addressed before they escalate into more serious issues? And I'm going to throw that out to anyone in the panel who would like to address it. Now, that's a very interesting question, because I think we have been alerted and warned over the discussions that we have had that you have to have professional assessment for a diagnosis of narcissism. So if somebody is looking at somebody in their family or in their sphere, and they're starting to say, wait, I'm starting to see some things that are making me wonder, how do they go about addressing it?
Wim, I'll tell you this before we get the others to in. That's a very good question, and I'll tell you this. The approach, I would say, ought to be wisdom, love, forgiveness, and management. The reason I say that, you find very often that, so let me give you a practical example. You or I could marry a narcissist, or we could be narcissists and someone marry us. And as long as we are not triggered or they're not triggered, then you don't really have a problem. Now, you find that where that person is exposed, and that exposure causes the pain of their shame, and because there's a lot of shame and rejection and those things that the narcissist suffers from. If you can understand what they're going through, what you can do about it is actually manage the way you relate. And very often, if you manage the way you relate, you may not end up on the other end of parental alienation. It is when the narcissists believe that they have an axe to grind. And that axe to grind usually comes when you expose them, you unwittingly rub their face in their own pain. That is where things get really bad. And then after the divorce, of course, the lies and the denigration and all of that continues, where they turn the children against you. So that's how I would answer that.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to add here something that Cornelius had also said earlier about lack of empathy. Sometimes people do change, as he said, when they get triggered. All right. But when the lack of empathy gets to the point where I have to always win, it's all about me and not about you. If you have told me no, and I'm going to make you pay for it for the rest of your life. And the thing is, the narcissist does not even realize that they are doing it. They think that they are well within their right. So you would see that they will they go from showering you with all the love so that they can get you. And then once they've gotten you, they're manipulative. Some people use things like gaslighting and all of that, but it's a syndrome, it's a trait. So all of those manipulative qualities that you're now noticing, when you start to second guess yourself, you know you put something down, but it's not there anymore, and you're being told you never put it down. These are little things that will creep in, and then the bigger things will come. So if you're looking for little tidbits that will show you, well, something is not right here, those are things to look for to start.
Well, it's interesting because following on from something that was said earlier, Trisha Ford, watching on YouTube, said, my ex wanted to turn the children against me, so he used money to keep them close to him. And so what I had to do was make memories, which we heard, you've got to establish your own connection with the children, even if they're being alienated, even if they don't want to see you, unless there's a court order. You can attend school events, you can support them, and you can be there for the child and allow them to see you, because that does stay, and those memories are very important. So thank you very much, Tricia. There was another question from Troy asking us to share some successful case studies or examples where families have overcome the challenges of narcissism and parental alienation. And he's asked, what were the key factors that contributed to their success? I think that's very interesting. Can we zero in on what it was that, put our finger on something and say, hey, this really was something that changed everything?
I can answer that. Not having a lot of successful stories because it's something that is very much ongoing. But what I can say is that a lot of parents are, once they're open to critical thinking, once they're open to understanding the reason behind why they are alienating or being the one alienated, then that's where we can start with a means of understanding. And I can see that being lent to successful stories, because once persons have an understanding as to why I am alienating the other parent, and they're able and open to exploring that in therapy, and then the one that is being alienated is able to explore that in therapy, then we are starting a successful story. I just want to piggyback on the incident about the children in particular when Shernal and Donna was speaking. I wanted to insert that within parental alienation and a narcissistic personality disorder, that people aren't aware that that in itself is very traumatic. That is a traumatic experience for all members of the household, right? So one is being the victim, one is being the bully. It's a whole circus, basically, right, of dysfunctionality and a lot of other personalities that are coming out that we are also very much jumping over. So we tend to only look at the one that's alienating or the narcissistic one, but we need to look at the depressive one. We need to look at the anxious one. We need to look at the self-harmed one. We need to look at all of those different personalities and persons that are in the household that are being impacted and affected as well. And just to add on that, as a psychotherapist, particularly, a lot of children tend to not want to talk about the problem a lot. So then that doesn't even lend to successful stories. But however, if we tap into a lot of nonverbal interventions where even children, like young children, like 6, 7, 8, all the way to teenagers that are being in the middle of parental alienation, a lot of nonverbal interventions can occur, like storytelling, like role playing, because they might not understand the verbal interaction between the parents, the younger ones. But once you can, as a therapist, like myself, I would open up room for them to let's talk about the bear. Who does the bear associate you to with? Like the bear's mommy, is the bear daddy, is the lion daddy? How loud does a lion roar? Is daddy's voice impacting you like that? And then you can take that to the father and the mother that are being the parents of the child. So that I wanted to mention. And once we tap into critical thinking and understanding the why behind it, then it can lend to successful stories.
And if I can just jump in there, completely agree. It's really key. And you mentioned it, Graham, in terms of being consistent. Children tend to be quite visual learners, and you just need to keep turning up as a parent. You need to be consistent because that's the language they know. Whilst they may be getting love bombed by the other parent, it's really important for them to understand, because what Nicolette's speaking about is almost neutralizing the situation and intervening into that child's mind, not necessarily who's bad, who's good, but understanding that they need to start looking at making decisions as they develop further into independent thinking. That can sometimes be slightly challenging for a 6-year-old, but when you start using their language, because what you want to do is to neutralize. As Chanel was saying, it is very difficult for guidance counselors, for therapists to start inserting their thoughts and their beliefs into the situation. The child needs to come to a point where they start making steps towards the alienated parent, and it's very difficult to do that if we create this because we can add to the toxicity if we're not careful, if we're not trained, if we don't speak their language. It's important to speak the language, get into the mind of the child, and also, if you're the alienated parent, being really consistent. I think sometimes what can happen is that you get so bruised and battered emotionally that sometimes parents, and I've seen it before, just give up. They're just like, oh, well, he or she can do whatever they want. I just can't be bothered. But you need to be consistent. And any gap there is to show up for your child, to show them that you're being authentic, to show them that you're being consistent, that you love them regardless of what the other parent's saying, is really key, because we need to understand that it's important to speak the language of young people and not come necessarily with, oh, diagnoses and our signs and symptoms, but do it in a way that they can start understanding, because these children will evolve and they will become adults, as I said, and it's very important that we intervene sooner rather than later.
Very interesting. Are there any specific programs? The question was asked, how can community-based organizations effectively support families dealing with parental alienation? And what specific programs or interventions have proven successful? Now, we did discuss the fact that success tends to be, playing a very long game. It's not a 2020 cricket match. It's a test match series that you're not going to know who has won for a while. But are there any, in your research, in your experience, are there any specific things where they've said, okay, we have seen some measure of positive change, even if, let's not label success as a end point, but positive change through any specific programs or any interventions from community organizations or even from individuals, anything that individuals can do to step in and try to mitigate this situation?
I was going to come in earlier to share about the first question you asked, but I'm going to give it to Fabian. I think Fabian wanted to say something. Fabian?
Yes, I wanted to comment on the situation with the child, but then Graham ball, the better ball, just so that I want that would like to hit.
Nor is a test match. You can leave it outside the roster.
I just really want to say that we have to be very, very careful with how we approach this whole situation, this whole topic of parental alienation and narcissism, and understand that children, that we have to take into consideration the views of children. I do understand that, a parent who is alienating another parent can fill that child's head with all types of stuff, what we may consider as garbage. But then there are situations where that child can be an independent thinker and observe what is going on and maybe act on its own behalf and based on what they are seeing. Sometimes we have to admit that there is a level of abuse sometimes happening that we may tend not to pay attention to. And so we really, really need to look at all angles and be careful not to label. While I understand, yes, there's narcissism in many situations where there's parental alienation, but not at all. We have to look at all the dynamics and understand that while we don't support parental alienation, that there are many other situations. We don't want to be taking a child into an abusive situation where there's a parent who yes is fighting for this child, but who is really not responsible and capable of caring for that child. So we got to be very objective, and we have to look at all aspects. Regarding the community interventions, I've worked at the different communities for many years, and I don't ever think I've seen a project regarding parental alienation or narcissism directly. I know that the National Peace Program has rolled out a national parenting program, the Parent Rights Program, which works with parents. And I think the organizations, in their wisdom and in their individual strengths, will tackle different areas. So persons who may display narcissistic traits, parents who may be involved in that parental alienation equation, would be able to get some information and hopefully do some reflecting and see how best they can pay attention to their behaviors, not only for themselves, but for the benefit of the children. I think we really have to understand that the children are the ones who are being hurt. A lot of adults bring a lot of the hurt that they would have had throughout their lives into relationships, and they act in such a way, in a selfish way, because it's about them and not necessarily the child. So I think a lot of these parenting programs would be able to touch different parents at different levels and different situations. And within that entire matrix, I do believe that the whole concept of parental alienation and narcissism would be dealt with within the project as a collective, not necessarily as a isolated
As a
topic.
specific, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to jump in here as well to back up what Fabian has said. There's a program called Partnership for Peace. It deals with male perpetrators of domestic violence here in Barbados. And in every cohort, there's a whole section that deals with family. And oftentimes, our participants, some of our participants will speak of their frustration of being alienated from their children while still having to financially support the children. And when they attempt to have a relationship, go see their children, they're all often blocked. And sometimes in the indirect way, we would help these individuals to deal with that process. And one of the things that we often talk about is, I think it was and Gottlieb that said something about consistency. And oftentimes when we get them to understand their role in being consistent in terms of providing for the child, whether or not they take something to the household, but that whole aspect of consistency, so the child would be able to say, yes, my father does care for me, regardless of what anybody else says. And that is looking at the alienation aspect of it, not necessarily the narcissistic aspect, because that may not come up, but the whole aspect of the frustration of being alienated from the child, it does get dealt with in other programs in an indirect way. And in terms of success story, we have seen those individuals who have gone through the program meet up with us later on and tell us, well, yes, they were able to eventually connect with their children.
Yes, Cornelius.
Yeah, I want to say, I want to agree with Fabian about some parents not being the right kind of parents to send the child with. But having said that, I want to say that parental alienation is not going to be considered qualified in that scenario. When we talk about parental alienation, we're talking about a parent being alienated that is safe, available, and that sort of thing. So I think that maybe we persons may need to go back and listen to some of our earlier sessions where we define the conditions under which parental alienation must be considered as a term as referred to parental alienation. And also, when we started out, we also talked about how do you know it. Overseas, they have some very thorough tests that are carried out, and the test is carried out on the alienator, it's carried out on the child, and it's carried out on the alienated. And they have come up with some very conclusive techniques as to how to determine. So don't believe for one moment that the psychologists are guessing. I've seen the research, I've seen the techniques, and they are pretty thorough, and there are the kind of techniques that the courts can use. And say that, I would want to say that I hope that members of the judiciary and the Bar Association will listen up to that. Now, in terms of, I think Fabian mentioned about the child thinking for itself. Are we talking about what are some of the success stories? Let me just say this. When parental alienation syndrome sets in, there is no thinking for self. Let's be clear on that. There is no thinking for self. You're talking about a child that is at the point of being brainwashed. So there's no thinking for self. I mean, that may be some a romantic thought we may have that, it'd be nice if the child can think for itself and figure out. Usually, not always, usually there is no figuring out for itself. But here's the success story that I wanted to mention earlier. The success story that I've seen from my research happens when the child changes environment. So let me tell you how that works. As long as the child stays in the environment with the alienator, it is almost like being on a spot, and you have a truck with more dumping onto you, and you try to raise the bottom, and more is being dumped onto you every single day, every moment of the day, every day for weeks and months. But here's what happens. When that child moves away from the parental alienating home, they may move away to study, they may move away to work, or they may move away to live. What the research shows is that a change in environment very often, not always, but very often gives the child a chance of recovery. Because understand that it's like being fed unhealthy food. And you move out of the environment where you're being fed unhealthy food, and then you can't start to think for yourself when you get different food that is healthier or food that gives you other options to think differently. So the success stories are not going to be that the children usually turn around when they stay in the environment. they usually have a better chance or the best chance of turning around when the environment changes. So I just want to put that on the table. There is no, usually the narcissist does not change. It is a case of if you can't move the mountain, you have to move away from the mountain. That narcissistic person, usually most people that, from my research, that are narcissistic usually die that way. And all you can do as the other parent who would have been married to them, who have children with them, is learn the technique of management, learn love, and learn forgiveness. Because if you don't approach narcissistic behaviors with an abundance of love, with an abundance of forgiveness, an abundance of wisdom, well, as they say in Bayesian parlance, the dog died. Because there is no turning around or changing the narcissist. You just manage yourself around them so that you don't trigger them, and it will order well or better for you and your child. That's what I wanted to put there. Thank you.
I have to concur with what Cornelia said about moving away. In two situations that I know of, because I know the people personally, once the child was away at college, away studying, next phrase you will hear is, I have questions. Because now they're seeing life differently. I have questions. And that's usually when you know that something positive is starting to happen with them in terms of understanding what they've been going through for 16, 17 years of their life. That
So, even in you saying that, I would say that if you are the alienated parent, and you have the money to have your child go overseas to study or encourage them to take a job or something overseas where they can get into that environment, you don't have to say the reason you're doing it. Just do it, because the research shows that a change in environment actually helps these children who are brainwashed in these environments to recover.
Yeah.
I think that's quite valid, because brainwashing is directly connected to specific environment and repetitiveness. Consistency is the name of the game in brainwashing, just as it is the name of the game in trying to rescue the person who is being affected by it. So,
and here you say that, the other thing that just came to me, I don't want to lose the thought, so sorry for interrupting you.
Go ahead.
A lot of children who you see that are victims of the syndrome, when they first go into therapy, and you have a therapist that is skilled in this area, the child will say, but mommy or daddy didn't tell me to say this. This is the way I feel. They actually tell you. So if you are not trained, if you're not a trained mind, they will sit down and tell you, no, this is how I feel. This is not, I'm not being told. And essentially, a lot of times they are not actually being told, but 2 + 2 is 4. But when you say 2 + 2, you're not being told 4, but 2 + 2 = 4. So when you have a parent that is crying on their shoulder, playing victim, I got unfair so badly, had to get a court order, which there was never a court order. And the parent weigh into their emotions in a way that causes them to lash back at the other parent for what is false. Then there is no view, because a child that is intelligent, and all these children are intelligent, a child that is intelligent is not going to be flattered to believe that I'm being brainwashed or that this is not the way I feel. But essentially, you hear these children speak exactly carbon copy verbatim as the alienating parent speaks. The kind of terms that they use, like you might find a child that is, let's say, 9 years old, using a term that a 45-year-old would use. I mean, like, seriously? And trained therapists and counselors pick it up. You're not going to hear children use terms that a 45-year-old use unless that's where the influence is coming from. I just wanted to put that in there.
Well, Cornelius, before we continue, I wanted to ask, Fabian, I'm going to come right back to you right after this. But I just wanted to ask Cornelius, because we did have a comment earlier that I thought very interesting, where somebody was saying, well, is it always parental alienation, right? That in some cases, the child was never a fan of the toxic parent from the time they became somewhat aware of the toxic environment and see for themselves that this is a provoker versus a villain and victims. You start to see that. But what you just said, and what you said earlier about the specific tests that can be utilized, that you say they're admissible in a court of law. So it's a pretty specific thing that they're looking for and can be identified basically scientifically.
Again, I mean, I keep
It's
calling
not guessing.
Graham, to the trained mind, right? And that's a very good question. I'm glad it came out here. To the untrained mind, you might think, oh, well, the child can see who the toxic parent is. And a lot of times what the child sees as the toxic parent, again, is fed by the parent that wants the child to believe that the parent is toxic. So, for example, suppose you don't want your child staying up till all early hours at night, knowing that they have to go to school and you want to do well. The parent that says you have to be in bed by 9 o'clock becomes toxic. The parent that says you cannot be going to fetch and coming home at my house at 1 o'clock in the morning. The other parent said, no, I can't pick you up. You don't have to work. Still till 2 o'clock in the morning. So one has to be very careful in accepting the word of a child about what is toxic and what is not toxic.
That's what Donna was talking about earlier, as far as love bombing is concerned.
Correct. So here's what I'm saying though, and this is, I'm going to say this and drop it there because I don't want to prolong it. Research, and I'm talking research now, not my opinion. Research shows that even when a child is sexually or physically abused, they do not show the total rejection towards that parent that is the abuser. Now, if you could put a pin in that, a child does not normally show total rejection to a parent that has sexually or physically abused them. There is usually a measure of ambivalence. In other words, I like certain things about mommy, I don't like certain things about mommy, I like certain things about daddy, I don't like certain things about daddy. But when you
if I could get rid of this element, I would be very happy with daddy.
Correct. But so here's what. When you see, and I'm going to say this slowly because I know that there's a lot of logical thinking, but this isn't logic, this is psychology you need to go into to understand how parental alienation works. When a child wholesale decides to reject a parent wholesale, I don't want nothing to do with my mommy, nothing to do with my daddy. I don't want them at my football match. I don't want them at my ballet recitals. I don't want them at my graduation. I don't want them at my wedding. Usually, and I'm saying usually because there's always a margin of error, usually there is a third party influence. Usually, and I'm saying that with passion because I've read several pieces of research that proves this. Usually, there is a third party influence. That was, even people who are abducted, the psychologists find that people who are abducted assume a child with the abductor. You can imagine that? So you imagine now a child that has a parent, the first person that a child assumes an attachment to is parents. And we're talking about an available, safe parent that the child previously had. We're not talking about the abusive parents now. We're talking about a parent that the child had a safe, available attachment with. And all of a sudden, the child decides to reject totally. Psychologists
something wrong.
They tell you straight. Bing, 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 the alarm goes off. Look for parental alienation, and then they carry the test. And most times they find that parental alienation is at work, and the child has now become a victim of the syndrome.
Okay, Fabian?
Fabian
and then Donna, because I think Donna had something she wanted to add as well. Fabian.
I really don't even know where to start from now because Cornelius just right now the highway and I had about 10 different bus stops that I didn't want to get off. Cornelius, I don't you see, I like to be very how to even structure my words. I think when we're looking at these situations where children are concerned, we have to take so many things into consideration. A lot of what you said is correct, but then we also have to look at the idea that children and individuals function differently and respond differently. And you will have two children in the same environment, or more children in the same environment, and only one child, and all of them responds differently to this type of quote unquote alienated type behavior because you may have one parent trying to alienate another or family, as I would have mentioned, because it's not only parents involved in this, you have family members who try to put a child against the parent and that type of stuff, and that may be happening, and that child may say yes, 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 but really and truly in that child's mind, that child is no fool. And I think that the professionals that you speak about made such a case that we, even in our child protection act that we've had recently, that there's been so much debate about, where children are now able to have a say in some situations, and that say is taken into consideration. You know, we have to understand, yes, some parents have a very strong influence on their children, but then there are some children who are no fools. There are situations where there's emotional abuse, where there is physical, sexual abuse, and sometimes these things go unnoticed. And that perpetrator sometimes also plays the victim role, and try to really put things in such a way that everybody's against them, and really and truly they're the covert victims. They're the covert perpetrators, sorry. So we have to take a lot of stuff into consideration, and also understand that there's no one size hat that can fit the entire situation. Everything, you know, human behavior is dynamic, you know, it is fluid, it is moving, everybody's different personalities, and you really have to approach this whole idea of parental alienation, with, I guess, in a very cautious way, because we run the risk of sending the wrong message. In my opinion, this is my opinion. We run the risk of really putting it out there that all situations where there's an issue with that parental alienation, where sometimes a parent maybe trying to protect their child, you got to be careful that we don't call all these parents narcissists, you know. So I just want the information to be packaged in such a way that we understand that there are different dimensions to this. Yes, there would have been many discussions prior to this one, but you may have had only a few persons who've only watched this, who did not watch the previous episodes to see all the discussion behind the explanation behind narcissistic behavior and the traits and parental alienation. So in each episode, I think we got to be very careful to really not just take a one road type of street. I don't know if we're trying to say come across the way
I think so.
but yeah.
I think so. Basically, because it was raised, I think, on Facebook that sometimes the although I don't know if this counts, because the person said that sometimes there's a parent who is seeing some bad traits and is trying to help the situation by removing the child from the situation. But does that count, ladies and gentlemen, as narcissism, or not narcissism, but parental alienation in a situation like that, where there's one parent who is actively trying to protect the child? Does that count?
No, that does not count, because parental alienation is specific. The parent that is being alienated is not a threat to the child. That parent is a safe parent, is a good parent. There is no reason to protect the child from that
From
parent.
that parent.
Right. So when the alienating parent is trying to keep another good parent away from the child, that's when it gets into the realm of parental alienation. But what I wanted to add here is that we've been talking a lot about older children that can express themselves, children that can talk. But in some cases, in many cases I also know of, parental alienation could be as early as when the children are still babies. And at developmental stages that children go through, you will have a situation where children are shy amongst what we consider strangers. And there's sometimes when the alienating parent makes sure that the other parent is seen as a stranger to the child. So whenever the child is around that person, and the alienating parent moves away from the child a little bit, the child will cry and run after the parent who they're accustomed to. And that is normal behavior for a child to stay with the people that they're accustomed to. However, when the other parent is not being able to spend enough time with the child,
They're
So they
working, they're
become
doing something. Yeah.
exactly. So we also have to take into consideration the younger child as well, in terms of an active alienating situation that's going on.
Wow. Alison, I think you wanted to make a contribution.
Yes, Graham. Maybe controversial. I'm just thinking
Oh, bring the
about
controversy. Let's go.
I am just thinking about what Cornelia said and talking about research. I look at the Caribbean context. How realistic within the Caribbean is it for persons to change environments? What I have seen and what research tells us, and I alluded to this at the beginning, is that for a child, they sometimes create their own new environment. I think Fabian spoke about children aren't foolish, and I'm not saying anyone's saying that, but they may create their own environment. So that may mean that they result when they're having parental alienation and some of these adverse childhood experiences, they may run away. They may use different coping skills. They may create their own environment, whether that is, just disassociating themselves within the family structure, spending a lot of time just in games and in, artificial intelligent games, etc., and also using substances to get away, because that's their coping skills. Because every single one of us have certain coping skills, whether you're a child or an adult. We look to be as safe as possible. So sometimes, especially within Barbados, it's not as easy. And I know research shows, I'm not doubting that, to say, well, remove the environment. Even if you have a child who has experienced that, and then they go to college and they start having questions, they still end up in the therapy room. They still end up, well, how can I make sense of some of these questions? So it's really important that we intervene sooner rather than later. So I'm just looking at the research and how within the Caribbean context is that realistic? Because for persons who are looking, they may say, okay, so how do I cope with this situation? Do I have to wait till the child is 17, 18? So I have to see my child go through all of that, like what Nicolette was saying, all of that trauma until they remove and are put into another physical environment. What we can find is sometimes people create their own environment within their own. They just have their own coping skills to create their own environment. So they may spend less time at home. They may, as I said, run away. They may use substances to create their own environment where they numb that pain, numb that being, uncomfortable. So it's really key that we look at that as well.
Well, I note that most of those aren't very healthy options, to tell the truth. But I want to piggyback on what you talked about, the Caribbean experience, because a question was asked. I think Troy Clark again, thanks, Troy. In cases where parental alienation is present, what legal avenues are available to protect the interests of the children involved, and how can parents navigate these options? Now, I don't know if I don't think there are any lawyers here, but I would like to hazard an unexpert guess that there isn't really much in terms of the courts, because I don't think the courts really look at parental alienation at the moment in the Caribbean context as a specific issue by which they would take action in a child's life.
Graham, the courts, if I may jump in here, the courts from what we see do not understand it. In fact, I had someone call me a couple of weeks ago and shared a real sad story about not having any relationship with his child for 7 years. And a couple of years ago, he would have approached the court to get a part of the summification. And the court basically said, what is so special? And this is what he's saying. I'm assuming that he's telling the truth. He said that the court said, what is so special about this vocation? There are many more to come, denied. And by next vocation, the child was alienating. So I'm just saying that I don't think that the court is deliberately doing anything to damage. I just think that it is ignorance, that the court just doesn't understand parental alienation. I don't think that the court probably order investigations enough in these areas. But let me just go back though, because I wanted to make a little caveat to what Alison was saying. I agree with Alison, I agree with you that there is not enough context. And I wouldn't say just the Caribbean. I think the context of any society, moving a child from the environment is never ever an easy option. always using the example of going away to study or whatever, is that when opportunity presents, when an effort presents, we should seize it with both hands. So if you know that your child, for example, is in a situation or in the jaws of parental alienation syndrome, and there is an opportunity for that child to study overseas, where the child is now living out of the environment, you don't have to announce, well, you know what, I'm going to pay for Michael to go overseas study because you're an alienator. You don't do that. You just nicely get the funds available to have your child leave the environment, because the opportunity is a lot greater for that child to recover in a different environment than if they stay.
So is that one
with
of the success factors though then that was asked about earlier?
that for sure. Living, working, or studying in a different jurisdiction, or being out of the house, living in a different environment, even if it is the same jurisdiction. But the point of the matter here is, in these parental alienation cases, having the child, regardless of how it is done, having the child out of the environment where the alienation strategies are being engineered and practiced is what the objective is supposed to be. Get the child out by whatever means possible, while not having too much displacement. It's better than, if a child is going to study, at least the child is really going to study. But if you have a cohort that says the child has to be removed from the parent relation, the child has a bond. Yes, it's a dysfunctional bond, but the child has a bond. The child goes through a certain amount of trauma, even in trying to protect the child. But where the child now is going to work, where the child is looking forward for this new career, or the child is going to study, then that's more palatable. There is, and let me say this, there is no easy solution. So I don't think any of us here can sit down and find an easy, palatable solution where nobody gets any form of discomfort or injury. But we need to do the best we can for the child, because the child is the victim. And by the way, I also want to reiterate that parental alienation is considered a form of child abuse. We didn't mention that. It is considered a form of child abuse.
Graham?
Go ahead, Alison.
Yes, from an experience I actually know in Barbados, they may not have used the term parental alienation, but you spoke about the court system. What I do know, there was a situation where there was actually a person who was alienating a parent. It went through the court, and they would have sent social workers to do the investigations in both houses. What was concluded in that situation was that the father had been speaking to the son about the mother and has said some very negative things. What was good was the son was able to express that when he was interviewed by himself through the social worker. Therefore, what they decided to do as a court was to ensure that the father in this situation received some parenting workshops, and also some supervised parental visits in the interim. So they were able to identify, and I remember the quote on the report was, this particular parent does not realize that the negative speech that he's using towards the mother is actually impacting his relationship with his son, and not what his desired outcome was for the child to be alienated from the mother. So there is hope out there, and they were able to make sure that that was a court order. So they want to obviously help the person who is seeking to alienate the parent, but also not to interrupt the fact that that son and the father still needs to be connected in some form of healthy way.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sad because I feel as though this really needs so much more airing. It really needs so much more discussion. And I would like to encourage all those watching to please ensure that you continue to interact with Family Fest Barbados on our social media pages, on our YouTube channel. The comments will still be open. Make sure you interact and make sure you engage. And if you need help, make sure you reach out, because we are Family Fest. We are here to provide hope, help, healing as you look towards happiness. That's our goal, and we want to help you. So make sure that you reach out, and don't stay in the situation that you are suffering through all by yourself. There's help. There are people who want to help you, who want to encourage you, who want to see you come out on top of this situation, not in a situation that wins for you, but a situation where your entire family prospers and is a big W for everybody involved. So, thank you so very much for being with us across this past month. It has been wonderful sharing with you, wonderful learning. I certainly am very much more informed than I ever was before. But sadly, our time has run out, and we've come to the end of this 2024 series of Family Fest discussions. I want to thank all of the panelists, not just today, but across the last couple of weeks, for being engaging, for bringing expertise and knowledge to bear on this very critical situation. And I would like to make a personal appeal to those who are in charge in the court system, the legal system, to ensure that there are protections in place, that the persons involved in the social element, the social work element, psychological element, all of these people, the judicial element as well, are trained in recognizing and understanding the levels to which this kind of behavior can go and how devastating it can be, not only on a situation right here, because physical abuse, I mean, that's pretty easy to stop. But when you've got this kind of mental abuse that is going forward for years and years, this is real trauma. And if you think it's bad enough what physical abuse or sexual abuse to a child, to a minor, would produce in an adult who has had to go through that trauma, imagine somebody who's been brainwashed for decades, trying to come into a realistic, proper expression of being a good citizen of Barbados or any part of the Caribbean. So we really want to look at that training and look forward. However, I want to encourage everybody watching that there is hope, not even necessarily because of all of these elements, but because you simply can make a change. That is what Family Fest is all about, encouraging you to make a change. And as you start a relationship, if you're scared of all the things that you've heard over the past month, well, as you start a relationship, as you start to wonder, hey, could this be me? Is this my partner? What I would like to encourage you to do is get some professional help. That's what they're there for. All these people you've seen, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the social workers, the counselors, get to one of them and get some help. It doesn't have to get to this point. You can do better if you know better. And I'm glad we've helped you to know better. So go forth and do better. We're Family Fest, and it's been wonderful having you. Thank you, and good night.
We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness. With God on our side, we're marching strong, looking out for hurting children all around. Bringing